I'm going to just begin by welcoming everybody to this second Conversations program. And my name's Jim McClellan. It says James, but everybody knows me as Jim. And I'd like to offer a warm welcome to everyone on behalf of SSGN, which is the shorthand for the Spirituality and Sustainability Global Network. And this is our Conversations series as a part of our Eco-Spirit initiative. And now SSGN is a diverse spiritual network with a mission to inspire, educate, and to network leaders, and especially young leaders, together from different spiritual traditions across our human family. The purpose of this is the personal and global transformation of our consciousness in the service of sustainably healing the earth. And the inspiration of our mission emerged from the 10 spirituality and sustainability interfaith conferences held in Assisi in Rome. And as mentioned, I have a picture of our 2018 Assisi visit here in the background. The goal of the program is to illuminate aspects of our environmental crisis, their origin, and pathways to a better future. So this series is intended to be made available on YouTube and also linked to the SSGN website. And it's a complement to our podcast Make It Sacred series, which is available on our website. So, and now it's my great pleasure to introduce our Amanda, a member of the board of SSGN. Amanda, will you please introduce our speaker tonight?
Thank you, Jim. Hi, everyone. Greetings I'm joining you today from Costa Rica, where I'm originally from. And it's really nice to see this group. And thank you, everyone who's watching the recording as well. So today we're going to hear from Joe Holland, who is an eco-social philosopher and Catholic theologian, exploring the intertwined ecological, social, and spiritual breakdowns of modern industrial civilization and the need for a regenerative, postmodern, eco-spiritual renaissance. Joe received his Ph.D. from the University of Chicago, and he has published 19 books, lectured around the world, and received numerous awards. He's the co-founder of SSGN and the education coordinator for SSGN Eco-Spirit project. So thank you so much, Joe, for preparing this talk for us today, and we're excited to hear you now. You're muted.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Amanda. It's good to see everybody. A number of old friends I see there. Wow. I'd love to chat personally. But I do have to honor Elisabetta, who was the inspiration behind SSGN. And I don't know if you can wave your hand, Elisabetta, so everybody knows who you are. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I've been working. Well, first of all, I'm afraid this paper I'm going to deal with it. I hope it's not real boring. So if you get very, very bored, I figured at least you could look at the, watch the waves and the palm tree dancing in the breeze. So there, all right. I'm going to do two things. The paper itself is the second thing. It'll be the longer, but not very long, about Celtic Christianity, and I'll come back to that. I'm going to want to say, the first part is I want to give some background to that. First of all, how it fits into the larger scheme of things that SSGN thinks about. And then secondly, how it fits into where we are now historically as well. And I posted these on the SSGN Eco-Spirit website, and the URL will be listed at the top of all the pages. So I'm just going to go through some of them quickly. I won't elaborate a great deal, particularly about the first one. I'm going to share screen now. Make sure I can get the right screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. This is a beautiful lake in Ireland called Glendalough, meaning the Valley of Two Lakes. It was a site of an ancient Druid center, probably, and later in the 5th, 6th century of a famous Irish monastery founded by St. Kevin, And according to a friend of mine, in the Middle Ages, thousands of young people came from the continent here to study with the Irish monk scholars in the 6th century. So that's a kind of backdrop for the whole presentation. Again, this paper and the other one is going to be listed right up here. Now I'm going to go through real quickly. This is Tom Berry's book, The Universe Story. Some of you here may be very familiar with it. Others maybe never even heard of it. Tom Berry was a Catholic priest, a historian of cultures and religions, especially Eastern cultures and religions. Excuse me. He died not too long ago. He was a very dear friend of SSGN and of all of us who were in it. He was a key figure along with Brian Swim in many Assisi conferences that we had and that Elisabetta and Rick Clugston organized in the 1990s, and so on. So a very important, in our view, one of the most important ecological thinkers that we have to draw on, laying out a new mythic view of reality and an understanding of the universe. So this is for kind of summarizing the contents of the table of contents. This is the universe story, the story we do not know. We have a very different story about a mechanical Newtonian universe and with Cartesian dualism from Descartes, which mind and matter are split and so on and so on. Getting into all that would be another interesting conversation sometime, but I won't do that. So the universe begins, some people think a little under 15 billion years ago. Now some people are saying over 28 billion years ago. Who knows? The primordial flaring forth. Nowhere suddenly a point appears, and within it is all time and space. And now it expands up to the entire universe. Paquita, my wife, and I watched a video the other night of through the pictures from a map through the new Webb telescope going deeper and deeper into the cosmos. It was incredible. We have billions of galaxies, and inside each one of those is billions of suns. And so it's an enormous place. And it all came out of this one little point of incredible, colossal energy. Huh? First, after a long period of cosmic dark, galaxies appeared, supernovas appeared within them. They exploded. They created new stars and new suns, really. Stars are suns. And our sun emerged, and it created the living Earth. And eventually, fairly quickly within Earth, life emerged from single cell to multi-cell and so on and so on with genetic combinations. And then plants came forth and the animals came forth. And among the animals, we came forth. And we are the first ones, at least on our planet, to have reflective consciousness. And what Tom Berry said is at one point is that the Earth came in such a point in its development that it needed a species through which Earth could think and write poetry and sing songs and make music and so on. And therefore, we are the thoughtfulness of Earth itself. We can misuse our thought, as indeed we've done. The living Earth and human emergence. I highlighted several things. After apparently an asteroid hit the Gulf of Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula, the Cenozoic era began. Dinosaurs were extinguished, mammals grew, and all kinds of flora and fauna developed. I guess they were used to be eaten or trampled by the dinosaurs, and we live in that incredible age of exploding life. And that's been going on for 67, should be 67 million years ago. I'll correct that. And according to Tom, we are shutting down the Cenozoic era, and we have the potentiality for destroying all of life on Earth now. Hopefully that will not happen. But he discerns 3 and now a 4th stage in the human journey, and because we too are evolving like the planet and like our galaxy and like the entire universe. The first that he called the Neolithic age. I like to call it the primal age. And then the classical civilizations, classical era, the modern era, and this Ecozoic era. I call it the postmodern, meaning ecologically postmodern, not deconstructive postmodernism, but a kind of a regenerative postmodernism, truly after the modern. I have a big chart. I've written a lot about this. I'm not going to go in at all, but here are the 4 eras: primal, classical, modern, and postmodern. Tribes were in, and then we have city-states with mercantile empires. Then we have nation states with industrial empires, and now we have the possibility, if we don't blow it all up, rapidly by nuclear war or slowly by ecological devastation, we have the possibility of a local global ecological civilization. They correspond to, in fact, the speech, this is from Marshall McLuhan, the speech revolution, the handwriting revolution, the mechanical printing revolution, and the electronic revolution. I have a lot of stuff about other spirituality and symbols and deep myth here, but I won't get into that at this point. Back in 1950, Romano Guardini, Italian-German philosopher in Germany, wrote a book called, in German, Das Ende der Neuzeit, The End of the Modern World. And that's where we are now. If I go back, we are going, the modern era, which began around 1500, is ending now, it's collapsing. And we are going, hopefully, into a postmodern ecological era, but there's going to be a lot of turbulence and danger in between, and it's not guaranteed that we'll make it through that transition. Each of these had a different cosmology. The primal cosmology, and by the way, these are I don't see them as linear and one replacing the other. I see them as concentric circles, evolving, or spiral, or I should really say. They're all to some degree still with us. The indigenous primal is indigenous and had an organic cyclical cosmology. The classical is aristocratic. It had a dualistic hierarchical cosmology. The modern one is bourgeois, had an atomistic mechanical cosmology, and the postmodern would be ecological with an evolutionary ecological cosmology. That's just, rough background. The key points for where we are now. People are fighting over what's going on. Great political polarizations, violence coming in. Very frightening period of history we're living into. There are three strategies. Some folks are trying to make modernity survive on its own terms, and they're trying to intensify and defend it. I think that's doomed to fail. A reactionary strategy that we see especially in religion, but also elsewhere, is try to revive the classical hierarchical authoritarian spirituality and kind of put an iron band around modernity so it won't break up and hold it all together. That eventually heads in a fascist direction, I believe, and it's very frightening. It won't work either. And it will also advance the breakdown ecologically of the planet. The third one is a regenerative strategy, and I think that this is what I would call retrieving the primal indigenous eco-spirituality and moving on, building on all the achievements of the primal, classical, and modern, and particularly the electronic revolution, and moving on to a new stage, entirely new stage of history, but revivifying our roots all the way back to the very beginning. That's the key thing. In other words, the moderns, they just want to keep the modern going. The right, that's the left-wing moderns, let's say. The right-wing moderns want to pull the classical back in to put an iron band around it to hold it together with repressive authority, and that won't work. What I'm saying is we have to go back to the primal, to the indigenous cosmology in which we are part of nature and nature is sacred, and integrate that with the electronic revolution in a sort of decentralized global ecological way. That's the frame of reference. So either we're modernists, or we're reactionaries headed toward fascism, or we're seeking ecological regeneration. Those are the three broad political perspectives that we're dealing with. So that's that. I hope that gives you a little background. I won't say any more about it. I'm going to switch now to, I have to change my screen here for a minute. If I can do this without changing the screen. I think I'm going to have to stop sharing and just switch the panel here to change the screen. Stop share so I can, and now I will get my screen up. Pardon for this delay. And now I will share screen again. And it's going to come up, I hope. There. Okay. Okay, this is the real essay that's on the paper. I've been working on this for a long time. It's not my main work. I do it a little bit as a sideline. It's all new to me. I'm not an expert in it. And even this one is much longer than some earlier versions some have seen, and it's still incomplete. So you have to bear with me about that. I'm calling it Remembering Celtic-Catholic Christianity, a rural, indigenous, and eco-spiritual resource for the future of Western Christianity at the end of the modern world. How does this fit in? This fits into the third strategy. We've got to go back and retrieve indigenous spiritualities and learn from living indigenous spiritualities, Native Americans, African indigenous spiritualities, Asian indigenous. But for those of us who have European roots, there is also a European indigenous spirituality. There's a dominant one, or indigenous tradition, and that's the Celtic tradition. It wasn't just Irish or Scottish. It was the main indigenous tradition of Western Europe. So this is about me. You're not interested in that. Doing the paper, I have an intro. I'll do that. First, I want to speak about when it flourished, and then how it was destroyed by partnership between the British monarchy and the Catholic papacy. They destroyed the Irish Celtic-Catholic Church. It was a Catholic church, the Celtic Church. And by the way, you may not know, but there are 24 Catholic churches in communion with the Catholic Bishop of Rome. The Roman one is the largest one. It's the elephant in the living room. And that's because it's so big because it's been allied with Western imperialism and colonialism since the time of Charlemagne all the way up to Leopold of Belgium. And it gained all the colonial prizes over the entire global South. And it seems, and the other 23 churches are treated very marginally in the broader Catholic tradition. Many people don't even know they're there, but in fact, many of them go all the way back to the time of Jesus, the Syriac Church, the Chaldean Church, and so on. What I want to argue is that there was, in the early Middle Ages up to the High Middle Ages, a 25th Catholic Church in communion with the Bishop of Rome, and that was the Celtic-Catholic Church. And it was deliberately suppressed for colonizing reasons by the English monarchy and by the Roman papacy. Okay, that's the heart of my argument. I'll run some stuff through here real quickly. In a preface, I asked this question: what if they had not suppressed it? What if they had allowed the indigenous tradition of the European region to flourish? Maybe the modern world would have been very different. Maybe it wouldn't set out to destroy much of life on planet Earth. And now, if maybe we retrieve it, maybe we might be able to drink from that spiritual energy to help stop it. Any number of people have decided that nothing else but powerful spiritual energy will be capable of stopping the destructive machine that every day is growing right now before our often blinded eyes. Okay, and we hope it will happen soon enough, if it can happen, in order to stop it. Here's a little map of where the Celts were. This was kind of their heartland here. At the largest extent, it was all the green areas. They were actually over into Turkey. They almost conquered Athens at one point, their armies. This is in Anatolia and in Galatia and Turkey. St. Paul wrote an epistle to the Galatians in Turkey. Those were the Celts in Turkey. They came down into Italy, actually, much more than the map shows. They were in Spain. And the places where various Celtic languages survived, and there were many forms of like dialects of the Celtic language, of course, was here in France, sticking out toward the British Isles. I prefer to call them Europe's Western Isles, and Ireland and Scotland and Wales and Cornwall. That's where they actually survived. They can now call that the Celtic Fringe, along with the Isle of Man. They were Europe's largest indigenous rural culture. However, in the name of the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar, his famous Gallic Wars, plundered and slaughtered the Celts and defeated them, and at the same time destroyed all their cultural institutions and Romanized them. That was from 58 to 50 BC was an extraordinary but horrendous accomplishment. Europe may have been very, very different if that didn't happen too. And he also made a thrust into Britain, and he got all the way up here north of Scotland, and up here he defeated the Scottish Celts. This is basically who the Celts were in the Western Isles. You had the Gaels, and they're here in Ireland, and they were also in the northeast of Ireland. And there was something called the Columban Church, which was an Irish church here in the northeast of Ireland. These were the Picts, also Celts, and these were the Britons. The Anglo-Saxons invaded, the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes invaded, and they drove and they conquered this area here, and the Celts retreated to Wales and Cornwall. Okay, So it's the end of the modern world, and retrieving indigenous spirituality, I argue, is a key foundational thing that is absolutely necessary. That means reshaping entirely Western Christianity, reshaping entirely all our Western institutions as well, and a lot could be said about that. Jump in. Okay, let's jump ahead now to first to the flourishing. And I want to kind of have a negative approach to the flourishing to challenged 3 errors in a famous speech that precipitated an enormous amount of literature in Christian theology about religion and ecology. And that was a speech by a man named Lynn White Jr., who was very well known. He was a professor of at Columbia. No, I'm drawing a blank or a senior moment. I think he was at Stanford, and I think before that he was at Columbia. I don't know. Anyway, an Ivy League. And he gave an address to the 33rd annual meeting of the American Society for the Advancement of Science, later published in the issue of Science, which was their magazine. And he blamed Christianity for the ecological crisis, especially Western Christianity. I would disagree with him for blaming Christianity, but I would agree with him for blaming Western Christianity, at least as a deep cause. I think there's a serious philosophical and scientific causes too. He said in the famous line, especially in the Western form, Christianity is the most anthropocentric religion the world has seen. Now, in trying to save it, though, and he was a Christian, he was not attacking, trying to destroy it. His father was a Calvinist professor of ethics. He himself graduated from Union Theological Seminary. He held up Francis of Assisi as a model for Christianity in the future. However, he claimed that Francis did something entirely new, and there had been no precedent for what Francis do. The kinship with the plants and the animals, and the planets and the stars and the moon, as brothers and sisters. There were several developments out of it. I'm going to skip over that because we don't have a lot of time. Okay. He had 3 errors. First, he said, well, people talk about the Celtic Christians, Christian mission to Europe. He said, but they were just monks who were going around alien to Christianity for 2 millennia. The monks were chopping down sacred groves that the Druids had, and they were, because he thought they were idolatrous. Secondly, he said, oh, they had stories of animals, but they just wanted to show their dominance over them. And thirdly, he said, Francis is exceptional and is something entirely new in the Christian tradition. All 3 claims about Francis in relation to the Celtic-Catholic Christianity are wrong. Okay, get to the bottom. I'm going to have to skip a lot. Here's Saint Boniface. He was a Benedictine monk. He did chop down a big tree, an oak tree, to root out paganism. I think it was a sort of theatrical thing he did. But the Celtic Catholic monks did not do that. They went deep in the forest, always, wherever they were, or sometimes to the edge of the wild sea. And they found remote places where nature was extravagant and awesome and inspired spiritual imagination. And there they found kinship with the animals. Usually they made a community of animals first before they invited other humans to join them. And then they invited the local indigenous people to join them. They really weren't monasteries, they were villages. And they formed schools and they formed chapels, never big churches, little chapels where people would always be intimate, never a big church. And thirdly, they did organic farming with the people. And they went there because they felt that nature was sacred and the plants and animals were sacred, and they wanted to share that kinship with them. And they saw that was the source of spiritual life. Very different from Benedict and the Benedictines, who followed the fuga mundi, in Latin, the flight from the world. Benedictines did a lot of wonderful things too, but they were not the founders of Europe, which they claimed to be. It was the Celtic monks who, all the way over to Vienna, they established villages that grew up. Many of them grew up in the European cities. And they would have still been Celtic monasteries were they not forcibly repressed. Okay. The second error is that, I have to tell you a story about Glendalough, about the nature of the monastery. One time I went to Glendalough with a friend of mine, Irish friend, John Sweeney. And he took me up there and he showed me around. It was very beautiful. And I looked at it and I said, "Oh, John, this is gorgeous, beautiful. But where's the abbey? There's no abbey here." And he said, "Oh, Joe, no." He said, "There's no abbey. This green valley with its shining lakes, this is the monastery." There. And that was true. It was the groves in the forest or the rocks on the edge of the sea. That was the monastery. And with the plants and animals and fish too, I guess. The animal stories. This I can only here recommend a book by an old friend, Edward Sellner, now retired as a professor, but he still functions. He's a fellow at Oxford University's Center for Animal Ethics. It's about Celtic monks' stories about animals. And they're so loving of their animals. They cherish them. They become one with them. They bond with them. I wish I could read all these quotes to you, but I'll just read the last line of one of them. And he says, "Like many shamans throughout history, ancient Celtic druids and druidesses knew from firsthand experience of the mystical connection between humans and animals. And what the monks were, they were really the children of the druids. In fact, many of their actual children became female and male leaders. Often Irish Christianity was criticized for not having any martyrs. Well, they didn't have any martyrs. The Druids, by and large, moved right into Christianity. They welcomed it and they absorbed it and they integrated themselves with it in an indigenous way, different than the aristocratic way that the Benedictines did. And they have many valuable points to can be honored, but it was not indigenous. For example, one of the famous, and just one example now of famous Irish scholars, and they were the leading scholars. They had kept alive when Thomas, the book, When the Irish Saved Civilization. It's kind of a popular version of this story. And they rebuilt the intellectual tradition in Western Europe. John Scotus Erugina means John the Irishman born in Ireland. That's what his name means. He said that a great mystic, and he was the head of the Carolingian Palace School at Aachen for the Carolingian court. Every visible and invisible creature can be called a theophany, that is, an appearance of the divine. And these are some dear appearances of the divine at Glendalough. Finally, St. Francis of Assisi, again, Ed Sellner points out this, and I will read this. Francis of Assisi, Ed Sellner said, lived in a part of Italy where Christianity had been brought by the great Irish missionary St. Columban. As a pilgrim, Francis visited his tomb in Bobbio in the north of Italy. And the numerous animal stories associated with Francis and his attitude of compassion toward animals and birds as sisters and brothers reflect the spirituality of the Celtic saints. The Bobbio monastery, and he founded many monasteries, but it's called in Italy still, even though it has long been a Benedictine ministry, the Abbazia di San Colombano, still his name is associated with it. And this was a sort of an icon of him. Ed Sellner also mentions a famous other German, in this case, mystic and scholar, a Catholic leader. Some people think she might have been ordained a bishop. She's got a staff there, bishop staff there, Hildegard of Bingen. Ed Sellner says she also was in the Celtic tradition. Hildegard, and I quote again from him, Hildegard wrote about the divine presence revealed in creation. In the hagiography she wrote on San Disabod, the Irish missionary and founder of her first monastery, she specifically shows her appreciation of the Irish contribution to her life, and she called her theology the theology of greenness. And Ireland is often called the Emerald Isle, of course. The other figure that Ed mentions is St. Bridget of Kildare. There was an ancient goddess of fire, St. Bridget, and Bridget founded a community of nuns who kept the fire burning until, I think, around the 1800s, and the Vatican forced them to shut it out. But they had the Bridgetine fire still burning, the fire of life. She was the abbess of a Celtic-Catholic dual monastery, and there were many of these, including at Whitby in England, the north of England. And very often the dual monasteries were presided over by a woman. They had the bishops too, but the bishops were not authoritarian figures like they were in the Roman tradition. Bridget is reportedly, according to many legends, was the daughter of a stepdaughter of a Druid as well. Columba, who evangelized Scotland and the north of England, was also supposedly the son of a Druid. By the way, these leaders of these monasteries were often married, and the leadership of the monastery often passed from mother to daughter or from father to son. Similarly, as we know, until the 11th century, the Catholic priests and bishops in the West were by and large married. Okay. So central to their proclamation was the good news that God is love and God loves all creation, as well as the ancient indigenous proclamation, which Jesus really reflects it. He talks all the times about the birds of the air, the lilies of the field. The indigenous proclamation that all creation, all creatures participate in and imminently reveal the divine presence. Okay. This is the destruction now of it. And then there's two waves. I won't elaborate this anymore. Stop it. Just tell you. In the 12th century, the Norman English king, who spoke no English and was Roman Catholic, had conquered England, and he decided to conquer Ireland too. He didn't get too far, but he established a beachhead. And he began the process, and together with the Pope, and an English Pope, by the way, gave him in a decree called Laudabiliter, he gave him title to Ireland. He gave Ireland to the English king, really Norman French king. This, by this first step, that will later lead to the doctrine of discovery. That's very infamous, and we could talk a lot about that. But the popes get the idea, and they're building a theocracy, by the way, in these centuries, which is a terrible mistake. And the celibacy in the Catholic tradition serves that theocracy. That's what it's about. So they have kind of sort of like cadres of sort of castrated eunuchs, as many emperors had, to be totally at their service. But anyway, the destruction in the 12th century, they began to destroy the Catholic monasteries and replace them with continental religious orders, particularly the Cistercians and the Augustinians that Elisabetta and Art and I know a little about because we taught in their school, in our schools. And made it a Roman Catholic way and began to bring in authoritarian bishops who acted like aristocratic lords. And the people resisted that very strongly. And the second wave came in the 16th and 7th century with the Tudor British monarchy under Elizabeth and her father, Elizabeth I, and her father Henry VIII. And they, under Cromwell, and especially, they just devastated the whole island. They slaughtered people, and they burned all the manuscripts, destroyed all the libraries, eliminated all the institutions of higher learning, and tried to replace now the Romanized Catholic Church with the Anglican Church of Ireland. That failed, but they did succeed in destroying the Irish eco-spiritual and intellectual cultural tradition. And they destroyed the system of the Irish clans and imposed a feudal system on Ireland. So the third part of it would be the retrieval of Celtic Catholic Christianity. I think that's probably a premature thing to talk about, but I will eventually write something about that. I'm going to stop there, Amanda and Jim, and I'll stop sharing the screen, and I hope we can dialogue a little about this. Okay. Any questions, comments, objections?
Yeah, Amanda, if you could unmute. Great. So if Amanda will be kind enough to be our moderator for any questions from our listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. That was I was raised Catholic in Costa Rica, so that was completely new to me. So thank you for sharing that. And so if anyone wants to start, you can raise your hand so you can use the function, or you can just open your microphone because we're a small group and we can take turns.
Speaking of animals, I was just going to stretch my legs after that long talk. Unfortunately, there's an animal under my feet who I love very much, our dog, but I can't stretch my legs as a result.
Okay, I'm going to make a comment or a question.
Sure.
Joe, where do you think the hope lies? I mean, I think SSGN devotees or people that are in our frame of mind know that we're headed toward destruction unless there is some rejuvenation towards sacred earth theology. Where does that hope lie, or where do you see modern trends around the world going?
Well, I mean, we argue that we have to reawaken spirituality, and that secularization will not lead us to it. But but all the world religions are shaped primarily by the modern and the classical traditions, and so they're in their present form are problematic. But I think all religions must retrieve and integrate within them the indigenous traditions specific to their historical roots. I think there are indigenous roots in all the world religions. Certainly in Christianity there is, and in Judaism there is, and in Islam, Abrahamic religions there is, and Taoism in China and so on. But the key hopeful thing, I think, it's like DNA. We don't get rid of the old DNA. We got cockroach DNA in us and mice DNA in us and everything. I think in our culture, in our DNA has within us the natural spirituality of the indigenous, of our own, because we all come from indigenous roots, our own indigenous roots. I think one thing is difficult for European Americans. You can talk about the Native Americans, so the African Americans and the Asian Americans all have pretty clear indigenous roots. What about the Europeans? Well, we talk like they never had any indigenous roots. Well, they do. And the big one, of course, was the Celtic one. You could also say there's Germanic and there's Slavic and so on. And there are many more that we could add along with the indigenous. But that means for European Americans, we should be working on retrieving these roots and integrating them with, say, with the Abrahamic religions. But I think Africa is extraordinary for the live presence of its indigenous roots and tradition, and I don't think China would have thrived as civilization for so many millennia if it didn't still keep its indigenous roots very strong, particularly what is a Taoist tradition, which claims to have been drawn from indigenous sources. Yeah, I don't know if that helps, Benson. I should add, it may require some very dramatic institutional changes, which probably the power centers of these religions will not accept immediately. And it may be necessary to create them and just and put them there and help them as the power centers collapse and more, which they will, and then let the life to come into the center of them.
Thank you. I see Stephen's hand is up. Go ahead, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Joe, for a wonderful discussion. I liked it a lot. Your remarks about the animals and the Celtic tradition reminded me of both Richard Rohr, the universal Christ, and of Teilhard, the cosmic Christ. It kind of ties into those wonderful traditions that are being revived now, after they've been tried to be squashed by the Romans.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Steve and I are all sailing buddies, and Steve is a senior official in NASA and a space scientist and engineer. So he knows all about the cosmic stuff. Yeah, thanks, Steve.
When we presented at the Earth Charter, Jim and I, about SSGN, one of the few questions from the audience was that we were against STEM. We were anti-science. And it was kind of a shocking question. And even the audience kind of reacted. And Jim pointed out that we were not against STEM. We were worried that there was an overemphasis on the technological without any spiritual reference. And that's what's most disturbing in terms of the world we seem to live in terms of current economic focus.
Well, and I think science has its own spirituality too. And the separation of science and religion is a particularly modern thing, but the modern science, I call it Newtonian Cartesian, let's put it that way, that is still dominant, is erroneous, and it also is leading us into this catastrophe. We need to critique the dominant forms of religion and the dominant forms of science. The new science that's emerging, ecological science, is very, very different, much more holistic, coming out of quantum physics and so on, many things in advance of, yeah. So, but at least the Catholic tradition has never been anti-scientific. And matter of fact, Galileo and the Pope were always set up as science and religion, and it was a terrible thing what the Pope did, put Galileo in house arrest. But the debate was not between the Bible and the new Copernican system. Galileo's book was the two systems, and the Pope was associated with the other system. That was the one from Aristotle and Ptolemy. It had nothing to do with the Bible. So the Catholic Church had already internalized the cosmology of the Ptolemaic Aristotelian system, and the Pope was resisting the new system, as were most scientists at that time. So I think there are a lot of myths in modernity. It's a medieval, it's a modern myth, really, that the sciences and religion are enemies. Unfortunately, being supported more and more by right-wing sector of the evangelical movement.
Joe, may I say something?
Sure.
Okay. I'm Meredith, and I to go to the question about how can the world be converted to this eco-spiritual way of thinking and being in time to salvage at least some of the world. I'm really encouraged. I have hope, and when I say I have hope, it's in the sense of Václav Havel's description of hope, meaning not a belief that things are going to work out fine. That's not the kind of hope I have. But the belief that some things are worth doing because they are good, and I certainly think teaching and introducing people and talking about this new spirituality is worth doing, very, very much doing, and that gives hope. But I also see a lot happening. I see a tremendous amount happening this way. The United Nations, for example, they've published this document in which they state that after a lot of research and work, they are of the view that the indigenous worldview, with its spiritual, which is a very spiritual, of course, a deeply spiritual perspective, that it's essential for the salvation of the biosphere, of the animal people, the tree people, the plant people, the human people, and that, the United Nations, when they take a position on this, I think that's pretty, and I think you've talked to the United Nations. Oh no, I'm sorry. No, I'm thinking of Four Arrows. He's addressed the United Nations on this, but I'm putting together a course on the indigenous worldview, and every time I mention it, people say, "Oh, I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that. I want to take that course." In fact, today, again, another person said that to me, and she asked me if I would consider giving the course to a, believe it or not, a Christian Bible study group. She thinks that they would be very interested and could learn a lot from it. And I said, yes, I would love to do that. She's very familiar with it. I mean, she's somebody who knows me extremely well. And we've talked about these things a lot. So I trust her judgment that it would go forward, but with them, that they would like it. But this is happening everywhere, So I just want to put that in. I don't think this is something way offbeat and esoteric anymore. I think it's becoming extremely, it's getting a lot of public attention. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. Meredith and I have talked about this a bit, and Meredith, I hope you won't mind my saying so. Meredith is a direct descendant of Pocahontas in Virginia. And she's very familiar with the indigenous tradition. So
Oh, yeah.
a part of it. On the UN stuff, also, the UN environmental program now has had for many years now a new thing called Faith for Earth of all world religions. I think there's 85 religions affiliated with it. They used to be very anti-religious. Not the General Assembly, but the staff of the UN was like the French laïcité, very lay oriented. But now they're really beginning to change. Yeah. So and I look forward to your course here at Riderwood, Meredith, too. I think that'll be a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to it very much myself. There's nothing I'd rather talk about. I just love the topic. And by the way, Joe, speaking of the Celtic Christianity, I've read a couple of books about that, and I just think it's fascinating and wonderful. And I'll just add one little tidbit. They also they were evangelists, and they proselytized the German tribe, the Germanic tribes,
right,
moving in. They didn't get too far with the Catholic Church, but
well, they were a Catholic church. They were the Celtic-Catholic Church. Yeah.
right. I mean, the Roman Church is what I mean.
The Roman one. Yeah, yeah. Well, the Rome was allied with Western imperial civilization, beginning with the Roman Empire from the 4th century.
Sure.
And civilization is built. It doesn't have to be in the future, but it has been built on the suppression and even extinction of indigenous peoples. That's the nature of it. What it really means, civilization means that you live in a city. And if you don't live in a city, you're considered barbarian, if people don't want to. And many of the North American Indians, they knew about the empires in Central America, but they didn't want that. They wanted to live within nature. And similarly, the Celts didn't want cities. The only cities in Ireland were built by the Vikings. They didn't want the cities. They wanted to live in nature. They thought it was more fun. They loved it. Yeah. And it was more spiritual.
Oh, I think they were right.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, what about everybody else? Do you have natural spiritual experiences with nature? Maybe you could tell us about that, because I think it is a natural way. It's been repressing it in order. Our spirituality is built on repression of what's natural within us. Do you have the sky, the trees, the water, the birds?
Oh, yeah.
What are your spiritual experiences with nature?
Well, every time I walk outdoors, I'm having. Wait a minute, something happened. I don't know. I don't see you anymore, but
we hear you okay, Meredith.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Yeah, every time I walk outdoors, it's kind of a spiritual experience for me. The birds. Every time I walk outdoors, I hear all the birds, and I see them. I mean, not all of them, but all that are within my view, and I watch them, do some extraordinarily wonderful things, like the way the little teeny birds. I don't know what kind of bird they were, but I watched them drive off. I don't know if it was a hawk or a falcon or what it was. They kept trying to swoop down and grab some newly hatched goslings on the lake here.
Oh, the birds helping.
little birds, little birds. Yeah, they would. Let's say the goslings were on the ground down here, just hatched, and their mother was with them, guarding them, trying to guard them. and their father was standing off at a distance, keeping watch, you know, being a sentinel. And this big black bird kept swooping down to try to grab one. But there was one little bird up in this tree and another little bird on the opposite side, right behind where the goslings were. And every time that black bird came down to get them, the two little birds would swoop down and drive him off. And it happened again and again and again. I was just stood there mesmerized, you know. But it's love. It's love. It's love and protection of life, even not your own genus or whatever. Well, I mean, we're all birds, but not the same.
Yeah.
Thank you, Meredith. I was wondering, sorry, if Art has a question. I see your microphone is open.
If my mic, yeah.
Arcane. You mean Arcane?
Arcane.
Arcane, yeah. Art, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I can see you, but you can't see me, right?
Okay.
The thought that you spoke of, is intriguing to me. Religions are based on the local culture, the indigenous nature of religion, right? And it's certainly true for Native Americans, perhaps for, when you look at the different division of religions in India, for example, they are tribal based, if you will. And we are kind of that way too. I mean, the Western culture is really a number of tribes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, it can be national tribes, but they're cultural. And that idea that religion is indigenous in many ways, and unfortunately, from the standpoint of the Catholic Church, that went abroad and tried to make little Americas out of other lands. When they brought a religion into a country, they wanted it to be like it was back in the States or wherever they came from. It's not really built into the local people. It wasn't indigenous. And that's why in many cases it didn't hold, because it didn't have that basic ingredient of indigenous nature or culture in the religion that was being taught. Just a thought.
Okay, thanks, Art. Yeah, I agree. Other people have any spiritual experiences with nature? Elizabeth must. You must. You're muted, Elizabeth. Yeah.
I think Ronald had his hand up.
Yeah, okay.
Ronald?
Ronald, did you want to say something?
So is it Donald or Ronald?
Oh, you're Donald. I see you, Donald. How are you?
Joe, this was a brilliant piece, a little heavy, but it was an almost exquisite piece. So I want to say just a few things, Joe. One of the great difficulties of all of this has always been the idea of flourishing and understanding. You asked a very pivotal question. If we didn't tamper with the religion of the people, or if we didn't tamper with the primordial way of life, what would it have looked like? That's an interesting question for me.
Yeah,
you know.
And
when the Jesuits did their movie, and I think that was phenomenally the question they were trying to ask.
The movie about the mission you're talking about?
The missions, yes, exactly.
Yeah, the missions. Yes.
The missions. I think that was phenomenally the question that eventually came up. What would have this looked like if we didn't go there and tamper with their religion? How would it have looked like? And so the communication right now is I'm speaking as I'm speaking with understanding and ideas that have for a very long time suppressed how I would have come up as an African, you know? So, and for me to be able to express myself and adequately say precisely the things that are acceptable and governable within our standards and understanding, I have to go through a particular medium. So if this was not tampered, how would we have grown and developed? What would we have looked like in the world? Makes it a very interesting discourse. And I'm glad that you raised it, because that's still what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to say, how would we have grown? Whereas there are still several cultures, and I think they are still understanding, and what we have just gone through with the Celtic spirituality and Christianity is what we're trying to do. How would he have looked like? So that question for me exemplifies our flourishing. There are other ways in which we want to come into the conversations, and not with the modern, way that we have been taught philosophy, theology, ways that we have rewritten our history and reinterpreted it. But what about what's going on now? In Africa, for instance, we are still very much innate with it. And we speak in a very cultural mood. We speak with idioms, we speak with our own form of spirituality that is rudimentary to us, that is primordial to us. It's in our music, it's in our art, it's in our way of life. And all of this, these are the kinds of things we present to the world. But how does the world react to it? He reacts to it as still something that is primal, something that is not modern, or new contextual ways of looking at, so these are the challenges. And I think that language for me has always been one very big problem in the way we have communicated and acted in the world. So Joe, having said that, my intention is that we should flourish. That's what we have done together, that we should have an abiding presence that will make us flourish. So I want to retrieve exactly the things that you are saying. I want to retrieve that Celtic spirituality, but I want it to be flourishing. So my sense is, can we have platforms and languages in which we can deliver in such a way that we can create a form of flourishing that will be more acceptable and tenable to an existing world? Because as it is right now, it's quite challenging. Do I make a lot of sense at all?
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much, Donald. Yeah, good to see you again.
Elizabeth.
Okay, yeah, I think we're going to keep going. A lot of people are leaving because it's been an hour, but I think those of us that want to stay can stay a little longer, so we can keep going with the conversation. Miss Elizabetha?
Okay. Joe, you asked me about nature and the animals. How can I say? Today, we care for animals or for nature out of a sense of duty. It's a Kantian concept of duty towards nature. My view really stands, obviously, from what Tom Berry says, that in order to be able to overcome the impasse that we're in, we need to have an emotional relationship with nature. We need to be, he talks about being intimate with nature in one of the last books that he wrote, the great work. Now, and that means it's a conversion that it's needed. It really is. And I'm using the religious term with them. It's this conversion which is indispensable in our times. If not, we're not going to make it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Thank you. We also have, I'm going to read this question in the chat real quick before we lose it. But Patricia Shiley, she said that this is fine for those of us who live in the country, rural areas, or smaller cities with the means to go to a park. But how do we measure those? How do we include those people who live in large cities and are not able to go to green areas? How do we reach these children and expose them to a different worldview?
Good question.
Well, I always thought I think that maybe Atsuko, well, it's not Atsuko behind your name, but did you want to answer the question about the city? No, okay. Well, I was going to say one of our board members, Atsuko, is doing a lot of work on in Tokyo, in the suburb of Tokyo, trying to change the whole development model to make of greening small parks, small forests, all kinds of things that could be done. In Baltimore, I know Cesar has been working with a black pastor there who has urban farming and also works with outside farms, I think, and provides food. I think if I were a pastor, I would want to get land out in the country. A friend of mine who's now dead, Al McKnight, was an African-American priest. He was the pastor of the biggest Black Catholic parish in the United States in Opelousas, Louisiana. He was in an urban area with housing, public housing, and there was all kinds of problems, drugs and everything. And he started a rural community, a village, little village, and a lot of the families moved out there, and all the pathologies went away. And they grew a lot. He was a big leader in the co-op movement in the South. They started co-op businesses, kind of like a small version and a rural version of the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain. So I think if you can do a lot of things in the city, and that would be very good, but I think to have a place that people can go to at least periodically outside the city too, so they learn the rural experience, as well. And of course, back in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th centuries, a lot of Protestant churches had Bible camps, and people loved it. They used to go out there on vacations. Some people would retire there, and it was a source of life for urban people too. So something like that, I think, would be very important. And we might need them for survival, particularly if they have, say, community-supported agriculture, can grow food, because all the systems which we have for food, water, energy are very fragile, and they could easily break down. And if they do break down, large urban centers become death traps.
That's true.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, Cesar. Do you have a question or a comment?
Good to see you, Joe. Good to see everyone also here. Thank you for your paper and for your reflections. So spending most of my time with college students and Gen Zers in particular, they are extremely suspicious of both religions in general, right? And so they identify as spiritual, not religious mostly, and also extremely suspicious of meta-narratives or just grand stories in general, right? Because of the damage and destruction that said meta-narratives have done in the past, especially to my queer students in particular, who are very sensitive to these topics of meta-narratives and structures and stages, etc. And so my question is, how do we deal with that skepticism, right? Because I get what people are saying about the love and the necessity for kind of this connection and nature is beautiful, but as students have pointed out, nature can also be violent, right? Nature can also be in some ways not feeling, it can be chaotic. And so I think, dealing with kind of what I call unsanitized scenes of kind of instruction that we don't get in the more rosy pictures of these stories. So I guess part one is how to deal with that skepticism, right, as best as we can as teachers, as mentors, but also as companions with them who also feel this skepticism in some ways, right? And number two, does going back like a genealogy, I mean, is that helpful, or can that also devolve into, let's retrace our genealogies and compare who's better and categorize as the human mind always tends to do, unfortunately?
Let me, great to see Cesar, and thank you for taking time out, Cesar. Your extremely busy schedule, changing jobs, moving, and writing a doctoral dissertation at the same time. Maybe I work backwards. I don't see the multiple traditions as competing, as seeing who's better than the. I mean, that's what liberalism has done. So if they're still in that, they're still in the grand narrative of liberalism. If they're still, of course, liberalism has no foundation. So of course it's very open to deconstruction because there's nothing there. It's empty, you know. But I think these narratives, as would be reflected, I think in the UN experience for the UN Forum of the Indigenous Peoples, the UN has a whole several web pages on this. I mean, the world is full of them. Perhaps the majority of the world is still Indigenous people, and when they gather together at the UN, it's symbiosis. It's like energy flowing together. They work. They gain from each other. So I think rather than things. Seeing things atomistically and competitively in a sort of what I would call Lucretian or Epicurean fashion philosophically, that we should see them harmoniously, or at least like an orchestra. Maybe they're not able to play so well together in the beginning, but the more they're together, the better the music they make. I think grand narratives. I think obviously there are some pretty powerful grand narratives out there that are very destructive, and one of the reasons they're being so destructive is because they have coherence and they have a large following around the narrative. I think we should meet grand narratives with counter grand narratives, not with just kind of an anarchist autonomy, you know. But the narratives must be constructed by all the people. I'm not going to be the one to construct the narratives, you know. Out of movements together must construct a grand narrative. We have some foundational things that could be brought in, scientific, others, and be a part of. But I think that people must be in on the ground. Everybody must be in on the ground floor of constructing what I would call a regenerative grand narrative for the future. That was the way I would see it. Tom Berry certainly does important things. He makes a very good contribution to grand narratives. I don't think it's the end of it. It's not being created by all the people. I think a lot of people can resonate with it, but we need more other people. We need Indigenous narratives. We need queer narratives. And the other big part I think that's been repressed that I didn't get into in this paper, but I did it earlier in something for SSGN. It's astounding when you think about the repression of women. Absolutely astounding, and of course colossal in the Catholic Church, but the Roman Catholic Church. But just imagine that the university system rose in the West out of that same period when the indigenous Celts were being repressed, their church, and celibacy was being imposed, and the new university was being born in the early 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. Women were not allowed, and that's because Catholic religious orders coming from Latin monasticism were in control of them, and they did not let women in. And then for over 1,000 years, that's just unbelievable. For 1,000 years, women were not allowed, by and large, few exceptions, you know, Abelard and Eloise, but a few exceptions, but by and large, excluded from the knowledge system of the developing West. That's unbelievable, I think, unbelievable. Among the aristocrats, if you were the daughter of an aristocrat, in Europe, you were going to get a good pre-modern. You were going to get a good education. You know, if you were the daughter of a peasant, you'd also get a pretty good education. You'd learn about the forests and the animals and plants and everything. But if you were the daughter of a bourgeois, you suddenly, in the early bourgeois world, that meaning urban, you get marginalized. That's just that. And so what it means that if we took a Chinese yin-yang friend, what we've gotten is a hyper-yang civilization in which the feminine imagination has been repressed and excluded. It's worse than patriarchy. I call it hyper-masculine. The classical age was patriarchal of suppressing the feminine, but the modern world was far worse than anything patriarchy could dream of, I would say. Only now are we beginning that women are flooding in a very short period of time into the university system. And I've mentioned this to my colleagues from St. Thomas, you know, until very recently I taught senior level seminars in the law school there, and they were capped at 16. In the beginning, there might be 4 women and 12 men, if I got my arithmetic right. By the end, it was probably about 14 women and 2 men. And often the 2 men were not doing too well. You know, I mean, it's the table is being turned. So this is an extraordinary thing. I think this is the great, probably, and indigenous women, queer women, Asian women, African American women, Asian, and so on, African women, all of that energy, I think, is coming. You won't see it reflected through our major institutions. What Tom Berry talks about, the four institutions. You won't read about it in the New York Times, or you won't see it even on MSNBC. But it's coming. I think, as was mentioned, from the grassroots, from down below. And as Meredith said, I think it's very strong. Networking it, and this is an age of networking with the electronic revolution. Networking is going to be the way it'll galvanize together.
May I? Somebody else lined up to speak, or may I say something?
We have one more. If you have something to respond to this point, please go ahead. And we do have someone else lined up for another question.
Okay, I don't know how to line up.
Okay,
I don't
I'll
know
come
the
back to you if it's different.
Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to say, in responding to the recent topic of people being resistant to or skeptical and all that sort of thing, children are not. Children, school-age children, even preschool-age children, I think are not. They haven't been hypnotized yet into the dominant worldview. One of my grandchildren, when he was still an infant and had just barely learned to walk, whenever his parents brought him to our house to visit, as soon as he got out of the car, he would head for my garden. Every time. He was fascinated with the flowers, and he would tell his parents about them and everything. He didn't care about anything else, just the garden. Anyway, I thought that was pretty wonderful. But if children could be introduced in the schools, for example, because I think it's very natural for children to love nature, to love animals, I just don't think they're as prejudiced or as fixed in their way as we are. And I think if they could have some early exposure to the Indigenous worldview, they would be very receptive, even as adults. They wouldn't forget it. It's not something you would forget. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Just a little comment, Meredith. Tom Berry, who we're referring to all the time, constantly referred to Maria Montessori's book, Educating the Human Potential, which talked precisely about children and nature. It's natural. It comes to them naturally. All you need to do is support it. Yeah. And that's very different. Our whole system is really educational system is based on, in many ways, on Platonism. We call it the academy, academics. But this would be the alternative of the nature-rooted one. Yeah. I agree. Back to you.
Thank you,
Amanda.
Let's hear from Fidelis. Uko.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Joe, for your presentation, and thank you, every person. You asked a question about natural spiritual experiences. Having listened to all the contributions, I'm just having the feeling that we need to do something more. I think experiencing nature that is close to what it should be. If this movement that is bringing people from different places can leave the cities, the developed places, and have some retreats inside those areas that are still natural and experience nature itself, it will help us to understand more than what we are reading. That's something I'm just thinking, if we can organize something and go to those places that are considered interior and undeveloped and enter the bushes, experience undeveloped territories as they are, encounter plants and animals, it may give us another idea of what we are discussing.
Yeah, that's good to see you, Fidelis. You're looking well. That's what I was referring to. I said if I were a pastor, I would try to create a rural retreat or place, or like what they would have called the Protestant Bible camp in the beginning of the 20th century. And actually, some of them are still around, you know. And Elisabetta used to take all of us up to, when we were at St. Thomas, up to Narrow Ridge Earth Literacy Center in the mountains of Tennessee, which was very rural, completely off the grid, et cetera. And students loved it. You know, we need immersions like that, real immersions. We need much more, but that's an important part of it, I think. Yeah. Elizabeth, maybe you want to talk about when we used to go up to Narrow Ridge. Yeah.
I think you all have the right idea. It's a conversion. I keep saying the word conversion, and I'm not even the person who usually talks about religious terms. It's a change it's a framework of mind that needs to change. It's a transformation of consciousness that we need to work for. And yeah, contact with the animals. I think, you know, children, very young children,
Yeah.
unfortunately, when they reach, you know, the college years, it's a little bit too late. But it's still hope. I think, you know, when these students came at first, no air conditioning, no running water sometimes, and all being off the grid completely, they panicked.
Right.
We had one year, 1993, St. Thomas University had a study abroad program in South America. And one of the faculty was Tom Berry. We lived for 12 days outside with the Shuar Indians. No electricity, no running water, and we slept outside. They all survived, and they came back transformed. I'm not saying we have to go to that degree, but
Well,
it's
I would like to.
definitely a change needs to come.
My wife, Becky, has worked with me for the past 30 years in keeping a children's camp going. And the motto of the children's camp is stewards of the mysteries of God and stewards of the earth.
Beautiful.
Thank you. No, that sounds amazing. That was the year after I was born, and I feel like people didn't study abroad that much back then. We have a comment or a question from Atsuko.
Okay, hi. Do you
Go
hear
ahead.
me?
We hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Joe, for the wonderful presentation. And then thank you for mentioning about yin and yang, femininity and masculinity thing. And my question is that, say, the modern Western science and technology, which doesn't have a spirituality and which is extremely leaned towards masculinity. Anyway, but this modern science and technology formed or the basis of the present world, and they're destructing the earth. But our trust or the belief in present science technology is so strong, and we can't think of alternatives, I believe. And we tend to expect them to solve all the problems that they created themselves, which I don't believe. But Joe, my question is, what kind of technology or the science that do you envision as for spiritual science and technology in the future?
Well, wonderful to hear from you, Atsuko. Atsuko is one of our heroes who's actually put her nose to the pavement and working to change the political situation.
Well, not really that. Trying, just trying.
On the outskirts of Tokyo, yeah. Well, I think there is just as there's a new spirituality, which is really an old spiritual. Peter Morin, the co-founder of with the Catholic Worker Movement, with Dorothy Day, used to say, it's a vision so old it looks new. But I think there's people are tapping into the spirituality, and there's a new side. So there's a new but old spirituality, and there's a new but old kind of approach to science emerging. I mean, the Silent Spring, Rachel Carson, she was a biologist. She was a marine biologist, David Bohm, who was taught physics at either Oxford or Cambridge, I forget which. He was completely on the same wavelength that we're on. So there's all kinds of scientists that are really opening the window into this new path for science and for technology. And with technology, the key thing is not technology. What is the design? Capitalist technology, for example, has been designed to control workers and to de-skill them. It would be very different. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we had workers who were very skilled. They didn't want them. They wanted to have these sort of like parts of a machine who would just do assembly and repetitive motion. And Taylor, did his Taylorism and all. But Harry Braverman wrote a big book about this. The technology has been designed for a specific purpose to de-skill people and to increase the accumulation of capital. So things get designed for different purposes. The problem is we have the wrong design because it has the wrong consciousness in the people design it. Also, it's been a masculine thing. It's not coincidental that it's very hard. Women are flooding over and taking over all areas of business. There's a couple of areas of obstacle, however. Business, finance, very, very hard for them to get it. They're being blocked out of that. Physics, they're being blocked out of that. Not out of biology, but out of physics and all things about computers, IT, and all that stuff. Very hard for them to get into it. They haven't been able to flood into all that because those are sort of like the last male bastions. But when women get more and more control over science, you'll get things like Rachel Carson. It'll come out very differently. So I don't like to think of science and technology as fixed essences, things. No, they're historical, they're evolutionary, and they have diverse strands within them. And the modern Newtonian, Descartes or Cartesian tradition that has been the dominant strand is now still in power, but it's becoming dysfunctional. And the newer way, which is emerging from incredible insights from the result of, the old science was a result of the telescope and the microscope. The new science is a result of the electronic telescope and the electronic microscope. And Steve Paddock could tell us a lot about the electronic telescopes in space, So we're seeing things we never saw before, and a whole different consciousness comes from that. So I'm very optimistic about the future of science, but it has a battle against, as Professor Kahn told us in the book, The Nature of Scientific Revolutions. Scientific institutions, just like religious institutions, are extremely conservative, and when confronted with new possibilities, they tend to become reactionary. And it's only finally a straw breaks the camel's back, and then they go through it, And there's a new book, by the way, by a professor from American University I want to review soon. And what she's saying, this is the way change is going to come. People have their ears, eyes, and minds closed. They're not facing up to what's happening, but they're going to get hit over the head pretty soon. It's already starting with tremendous numbers of heat, flooding, etc. There are breakdown systems that don't work, and it's going to really shock them. And she says, we have to be prepared to organize that when the shock happens, and they'll wake up. That's what, and not surprisingly, she's a woman. I have the book. Maybe I could just mention it to you. Here is I think this is, I would agree completely with the strategy she has. It's saving ourselves from climate shocks to climate action. We probably won't get any climate action really on a significant basis until the shocks become much worse. The other thing she says, we need to take a lesson from the history of the civil rights movement. We can create stronger climate movements by building on existing community structures, such as churches and labor unions, and taking advantage of climate shocks. But we have to have a structure in place who's prepared to be of service by networking people's awakening and helping them convert it into organized action. So That's my response about the technology thing and science at school. I hope it's helpful.
Thanks so much. I have lots of comments and then questions still, but my English doesn't allow me to express all I'm afraid to say. But thank you. And in my opinion, before we really can install or the change, we have to change the consciousness, like Elizabeth has mentioned. But to me, it's like a transition from the masculine mentality to feminine mentality. Doesn't mean men or women, but masculinity means that's large, bigger and then stronger and then, conquering or controlling. That's a mentality, masculine mentality. But instead, we need the mentality or the philosophy, consciousness, which try to say, for example, put yourself within the nature, melt yourself into the nature, and then feel that you're the part of the nature. That kind of the consciousness is necessary before we can really start the change. So that means that we need that kind of, the feminine consciousness. Feminine consciousness means that being a part or the feeling as a part of nature, and feel that you are the part of the nature, and then becoming smaller and united, or the networking horizontally instead of controlling vertically, which is masculine. So we need to shift from the masculine mentality to feminine mentality. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Can I say just one more? Yeah, and of course, these are huge mythic symbols in the tradition, the male and the female. But as Cesar can tell us, there's also enormous diversity within them. But the statistical aggregates are still very powerful, and we have to wrestle with these symbols, I think, too. But we will not simply be repeating the old symbols, but creating a different symphony, I think, for the future of them. But clearly, we have to put yin and yang together, and that means shrinking the yang and expanding the yin, but in a larger concert with a lot of different musical instruments playing, I think.
That's right, correct. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh. That's a very nice
note. Everyone. Yes, it's been such a nice conversation. I was actually not expecting us to go 30 minutes over and for it to go so fast. So it was really nice. And this is not the last conversation we'll have. So we'll keep you posted via email for the next one. I'm going to hand it back. Oh, well, Joe, is there anything else you would like to add before?
Just to note that, this essay, which is not finished, but it's on the website. It's ecospirit, one word, .life, LIFE/events, and you can download it. And also the background piece I put up there before, you can download from there. Thank you very much for Jim and Amanda for the opportunity for hosting this and the opportunity inviting me to do it. And thanks to everybody who contributed. I hope it's been more a symphony than a solo. Thank you.
Definitely. I just want to add that the link is also in the chat if anyone else wants to download it.
Thanks, Amanda.
Okay, back to you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Joe. I'd like to offer my sincere thanks to the SSGN board and program committee, and special thanks to Natasha, who's helped us with the operational aspects of this program, so made it happen very smoothly. And so we look forward to sharing our next programs with you. So please keep in touch with us for our next conversation series. We're hoping that in the next about a month, 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have another exciting program. So I hope we can be in dialogue with everyone in the future. Thank you so much for participating in tonight's program.
Thank you.